Was Jimmy Page sloppy? Hi, I'm Carl Baldassarre, and I'm a guitar player and composer, and I have been listening to and studying Led Zeppelin and Jimmy Page for 50 years. And I have to tell you, I often hear that comment that Jimmy Page is a sloppy guitar player. Let's listen to the words of the man himself. He said, "I'm not a guitarist as far as a technician goes. I deal in emotions." I think that actually that quote gives us some insight maybe in how to understand Jimmy Page as a guitar player. Now, what do the critics have to say? Let me read you some quotes from some critics. He has declared a war on beauty. He's sort of a madman painting in a state of delirium tremens. Gosh. And I don't ask that art should always be elegant, but I don't believe its role is to champion the cause of ugliness. End quote. That's pretty harsh. And they could apply to Jimmy Page, but they don't. They actually apply to the impressionist artists of the 1880s, which included Monet, Degas, Renoir, Cézanne. And these artists were innovators and inventors of a new movement called impressionism. And they used broad brush strokes that were unblended and a lot of bright colors, and it was shocking to the current era in 1880s of what was out there in art, and they really turned the art world on its ear, and they got a lot of harsh criticism for it. I'm going to explain to you what I think the analogy is between Jimmy Page and the Impressionist artists. So let's get back to the question, is Jimmy Page sloppy? Now the answer is yes and definitely no. Now first let's look at the yes part of that. You can narrow down sloppiness for Jimmy Page in one setting and one setting only, and that's live. Not in the studio, but live. And you might be surprised, but the only time that he was sloppy live was actually during solos. I have never heard a recording of him missing a chord, missing a riff, losing his place in the song. There might be one or two occasions, but honestly, he always was there, on time at the right point. But it was only when there were guitar solos, occasionally was he sloppy. And you can kind of boil that down, the reasons as to why he was sloppy on occasion, into two categories. One is going to be the consequence of the lifestyle in the 70s. There certainly was better living through chemistry. There was a lot of drugs and alcohol going on. And also there's going to be the occasional bad day that we all have. And there were those few unfortunate unrehearsed reunions which were caught on worldwide TV, and there weren't some great moments on those. Let's just admit that. But if you put that part of the sloppiness equation to the side, and you look at the other areas and reasons for sloppiness, there was a really good reason for that, and one that really was a part of the greatness of Jimmy Page and the band, and that is the area of being risk-taking inventors of music. And Led Zeppelin and Jimmy Page were fearless, and they would stretch out live to the point of breaking things. But oftentimes, there was a great payoff, because when it worked, you had incredible results that were captured on recordings, not the least of which would be Dazed and Confused, where they took a 5-minute song and would stretch it to 30 minutes through improvisation and stretching and pulling, and the whole band was inventors, and they were not afraid to take risks. They did not care if it broke. They wanted to see if they could break ground and expand the empire of what was possible sonically. And that gave us some of the great music and the great live shows that we had from Led Zeppelin. And I put that in a completely different bucket. And I respect and admire the fact that they were risk takers. Because if you're not taking risks, what are you really doing? And so it was wonderful to see and benefit from these risk-taking sort of live shows that they would put on. And they were known for that. And thank goodness that they were doing these things, because we got a lot of great music that came from that. But now let's turn to the area that he was not sloppy in, and that was in the studio. You never really hear Jimmy Page being sloppy. There's a little bloop here and there on occasion, and I could cite maybe 2 or 3 in the entire output of Led Zeppelin where there was some sloppiness in the studio. But again, it was adventurous kind of playing, and they kept it in because he is a master of emotion, and he valued emotion and expressiveness over technique. and you need to look at it through that lens. And I'm not trying to apologize for that, but just like the impressionist painters, you can look at a glob of paint on canvas and it's brutal brushstrokes and say, that's ugly. But you have to step back and understand that what you're looking at is passion and you're looking at invention. And that's how you should look at Jimmy Page. I'm not excusing the sloppiness in some of the other things, but really his total art was based on breaking ground. So if I really want to zero in onto what aspect of the playing would be considered sloppy and misunderstood, it's going to be his picking technique on soloing. And like the Impressionist painters, his brushstrokes, his picking technique were really these sort of sweeping style, none more illustrative than the Heartbreaker solo, where that has this artifact-filled brushstroke of his pick, which really sounds sloppy, but it's about emotion. And any of us guitar players who have listened to the solo on Heartbreaker recognize that that was groundbreaking. But this technique that he used, where he was sort of raking the pick across a couple strings, is it sloppy or is it actual emotion? You know, and that technique, that kind of sweeping, ugly brushstroke, creates and transmits a lot of passion. And I think that's misunderstood by a lot of guitar players. And as you look at it from a modern context, because over time, technique and technology has really required more and more cleanliness in technique, but sometimes at the expense of emotion and passion. And not always. But clearly Jimmy Page was more interested in emotional playing than he was in technical playing. But to not say that he was not technical, I mean, there's some amazing technical examples of his playing. Just listen to Whole Lotta Love live on How the West Was Won. That 15 minutes or whatever it is one of the most incredible feats of guitar playing and soloing that I've ever heard recorded. He's got so many different complex techniques going on, and it is amazing. So he had technical capacities that are beyond the reach of most of his guitar players, but he never sacrificed technique for emotion. It was always emotion first. So my suggestion in terms of answering the question of sloppiness is one of perspective. If you're fortunate enough to see a great Impressionist painting at a museum and you go up very close to it, you'll see the rough, ugly brush strokes, and it won't look like a flower. It won't look like a tree. It won't look like a face. But as you start to step back, and as Jimmy Page once said, distance makes depth. As you step back away from the painting, you start to see it all come together in a picture that once was considered ugly, but now is celebrated as one of the great movements of art, Impressionism. And I think the same way, the kind of perspective that I'm talking about, is the same way to try to understand Jimmy Page in terms of his sound and his style and his pursuit of invention and emotion. We can debate the question of Jimmy Page being sloppy or not, but there is no debate on whether he is an original. And my definition of originality is that originality exists when a work of art is identifiable with its creator. I'm Carl Baldassarre. Thank you for watching. Please leave a comment, like, and subscribe, and we'll see you again.